Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Saito Town Hall number 8. You'll notice a slight change of format today, namely an extra face in the triplet on the screen. And we're going to change things up a little bit today. We'll still have the bulk of the town hall dedicated to questions, as is sort of befitting a town hall. But we thought we'd cut down a little bit on the opening introduction and update and spend a bit more time talking in depth to the guest today, who is Dan Walton, the game doctor, as he's known to many, known and loved by many. So in preempting that, specifically questions about the arcade, about what we're trying to achieve there, what's coming up, what we're thinking and working on, those will get extra attention at the start. So if anyone has that kind of question, remember to just use the Ask a Question facility, the little link down below our talking heads, and that's a great way to get us a list of questions to work through once we've kind of kicked through the update and had a little bit of an introductory discussion with Dan. So just kicking off, I think the first thing to do is probably most important thing to do update-wise is just let people know that, yes, it's been a pretty tumultuous time in the industry, and a few major big players in the industry have had various issues, etc. And to let people know that we've weathered all of that. We continue to be in a strong position. We have good hedges and good financial management in place. This isn't our first crypto winter. And along with that, we've kind of actually moving into a great place where, as people know, the major rounds of vesting are all done. The project is now in a place where we've really got some clear air, and we're not fighting off as many when marketing questions, and that means we're also in a position to kind of build and to excel and to maybe break away from being compared to the latest DeFi fad, etc. a little bit. Partnering with that, transaction volume has been very strong, and what's really cool is we're starting to see some new groups of people engaging on the arcade, and that's really great for us because getting organic users and then getting identifiable user groups coming along is a great part of saying, look, we're starting to build something here, we're starting to get momentum, and people are liking what we're doing. At the same time, we've had some decent releases, including most notably enabling the generic Web3 crypto support. So right now you can come along and use Tron in some of the games and in various places on the Saito.io site and stack. We plan to really ramp up what we're doing there with some more releases soon, and also engagement with more communities around that. Same time, we've also released I've had our first Saito improvement protocol come through for open discussion, and that's come through into some coding work. We've also been working hard on the marketing side, both with outreach, and I think you've seen things like we're now on FTX Signal, which means we're getting our message out to a really broad group of crypto-interested people. We keep doing things like AMAs, and I was on a podcast the other day, and of course, great events like the town hall where we get to connect directly with people. So things are really positive. I think the mood around the team is really upbeat and excited. And we'll probably wind up the bulk of the kind of update there. I'm not sure, David, did you have much of a tech update you wanted to give, or should we go into talking to Dan directly?
Yeah, I'd say rather than, there's a bunch of stuff to talk about, but why don't we just do a Q&A? I just suggest and point out to you guys that this is Dan's first town hall, which means he's going to be unguarded and soft, and he may leak incredible amounts of alpha if you pin him down. So we're going to just throw the questions at him. You can see what you can get out of him, and then we'll either deny it after the fact or we can go into detail. But yeah. I see there's a question about the Twitter clone already, so let's just dig into the tech stuff at Q&A.
Yeah. Cool. So then maybe let's just introduce Dan first. So Dan's been known to David and I for some time. We're friends from a long time back. Dan's actually a got a doctorate in computational linguistics, which he wrote in Chinese. If anyone's wondering if Dan's smart or not, that's enough, I think, to kind of demonstrate that from the start. But he's been working in computer science for a while before that, and he's come on and really taken to heart leading the game experience on the Saito arcade and turning it into something that's really, first rate, but also engaging for different audiences and trying to kind of up the level of the gameplay, etc., while we're still using the arcade as well to kind of push forward on P2P software development and, the whole, I suppose, investigation side is also doing on the side of how do you make really great peer-to-peer applications that don't kind of revert back to client-server Web 2 world.
I think without Dan's work, it's happened slowly and it just keeps coming out, and we don't make a big deal about all of the changes. My guess is we'd be 70% of where we are transaction volume, maybe 65.
Yeah, so I think one thing that people aren't seeing there as well is the amount of that's organic that's coming along. And we've also got, for those of us who are watching the numbers closely, we've also got much greater diversity in the kinds of things people are doing. We're much, we've got many more strings to our bow in terms of what you can come and do and play. So I suppose the first question I might just ask Dan directly is how's it been? How's the experience of working on the arcade? What are some highs and lows?
Yes, I'm still muted.
Dan, you love the starting point. The code was great to deal with.
Well, the thing is, it has been a true pleasure to work in the arcade because when I came in, the code was basically flawless, and so I've just been, adding small tweaks here and there to make it even better, which is very difficult to do. So that's why it's so important. No, it's been fun because it's like I try to focus just on the games, and games are fun instead of all the difficult layer work underneath that the tech stack that the games are built on. But yeah, these guys have trusted me because I do a little bit of work on one game and then another, and they just keep giving me more and more power. And now with more power comes more responsibility, and thus I'm here. But my goal tonight is to make sure they don't invite me to do this again. So.
Come on, we've got to ask Dan some really edgy questions from there.
Maybe before people ask, I can ask, you can ask. Dan, you want to talk, I think a lot of the old timers, they've seen some games go away, and they've seen some new stuff come out, like Spider. I don't think people realize that, but I'm not sure, Dan, if you really wanted to do better than Slitrio, because I'm not really sure it's possible to. But
true. True. So Slitrio is a very good game. It's just it's impossible to win. So I wanted to produce a game that was just slightly less impossible to win.
I just think you need to get better at Slitrio. But Spider came out of nowhere, and there's other stuff that's kind of moved away, and it's in the process of being worked on. Do you want to talk about some of the stuff that you're working on? I don't even actually know the status of some stuff like Scotland. That disappeared because it wasn't very fun.
Well, sure. Yeah, the games that have disappeared were basically broken. So we just kind of shuffled them off into a corner. We're into the repair shop so we can work on them. Yeah, there are actually quite a few games in the pipeline that are getting very close to launch, although, it might take a while for them to come out. We do have a cooperative board game that's just getting refreshed. And then so Dave mentioned Scotland Yard. I've put in a lot of work on that, and I don't think anyone's seen it yet. So, but it's missing a je ne sais quoi, but it's almost fun. Well, actually, you can't tell if it's fun because it's impossible to tell if you're just playing against yourself. It's one of those games where it's basically the information gradient makes it fun, and when you can't pretend to play against yourself and not know something. But other than that, yeah, and then there's actually, just like Dave mentioned, Spider came out of nowhere. I have a whole other secret project game that's basically 95% done, so just have to see if we can schedule that into the pipeline. A nice deck building strategy game. So we'll have a wide variety of games coming out to sort of flesh out the matrix of options on the arcade.
And maybe I can remind our community what this means is that if you hate anything about any of the games, or if you have ideas on how to improve them, Dan's actually a really good point person to talk to, or harass. You can harass us too, and what we're going to do is we're going to send your hate mail directly to Dan, and then chat about what we can fix. But yeah, I mean, just maybe returning to what Richard said, we're seeing like it's a straight line between the games get better and people stick around the arcade and play. We're seeing a pickup, interestingly, with Chinese players around TS, sticking through with Settlers. Some people that will just kind of hang out and, like they'll play solitaire while they're waiting for a game. So for us, this stuff is really important, and we could really benefit from you guys as a community as we get the games out, saying this is how to improve it. Like, help us find out where they're frustrating and how to tweak corners. Red Imperium is getting better too. I've been doing some work on that. But do we want to get into community questions for Dan, Richard? You guys have any questions about?
Yeah, I'm not seeing any games related questions, but maybe we can just sort of hop into the questions and direct ones to Dan as they come up. There is one right at the top here I can see, which is, can we tell people more about the people that have joined the team as well? And I think maybe we can do a quick run through.
I could ask Dan a couple more questions.
Yep.
If we want to keep the focus on the arcade first, because I don't know if at what point Dan throws his laptop out the window. I'd suggest, like, Dan, could you give people a sense maybe for the next, like, leaderboards and rankings and that kind of stuff? Do you want to give a sense to the community of where we're going? Because I don't know how transparent we are about that, the direction of where the arcade is going. I could.
Well,
you could.
I don't want to say too much, you want to under promise, over deliver.
Mm-hmm.
So I prefer to keep things like on the down low until there's something to like really surprise people with. But yeah, the leaderboards, that's my new priority as of now. So I'll be putting all my efforts into that for the next week or so, and however long it takes to get it up and working nicely. But yeah, it'll be a great way to like engage with the arcade, where like tracking your sort of your ranks on the various games. So we've got some different ideas that we're kicking around. I'm really kind of excited about getting a sort of a way for us to like use it to track who's the best at Split Trio or Spider. So for some of the non-competitive games, like figuring out ways to get players ranked on that. And just as a general like stickiness engagement tool to like get you wanting to come back to Saito every day to kind of boost your rankings.
We have a question here. On the topic of Spider, Nano Yebiz, please get rid of modal OK pop-ins. They're insanely frustrating UX-wise. I'm sure you can read the question. Maybe the general question is, like, people have suggestions. How should they put them on your lap or our lap as a team? I know sometimes like people will ping me with it and I'll try to pass it along, but it doesn't always work. Do you have suggestions on how people can, if they have suggestions or hate or love things, how they can put that on your radar? I mean, should people be putting GitHub issues in or emailing you, or?
It'd be best to put them on the GitHub suggestion board. I do look through those periodically. Okay. So, I see this. Yeah. No, I mean, like, I could do this. Yeah. What would we do? We need to create a new UI tool for this, but yeah, okay. Yeah, that's all I said. Just like, don't click on the wrong stack of cards. That's my solution. Actually, no, we have an automatic mode, so you can switch it over where you don't have to click the stack. When you click the card, it'll move automatically to a place where it's legal to move to.
Really?
Yeah, it make it hard to, like, if you're trying to get the top score, like because sometimes it won't move it to the best stack, but it will. You can turn into automatic mode and just it'll like Solitrio now. You automatic mode. You don't have to click where you want to go. You just click I want to move this, and it'll move it for you.
On the gaming front, if people have suggestions, one thing I can flag that it's useful to have the community help us think through. I'll give an example. Like, often people will come with criticisms like, I want a back button or I want a confirm button. And they don't actually want a confirm button because nobody wants a confirm button on every single move. What they're thinking is like, there was this situation where I misclicked and it screwed things over for me. And often it means like, it's someone complaining because they're dragging the board and that triggers something. So like with the gaming, if it works well, it's very seamless, but come at us with creative suggestions as well. And it's not always obvious what the right fix should be. Like with Twilight Struggle with the misclick, one of the solutions was increase the size of the click target. So the buttons are like this big instead of that big and people don't misclick. Or if the board is dragged and moved, don't allow people to be tightly moved or off or that sort of thing. So, does anyone have any other questions for Dan on the arcade? Or requests? Now's the time to get a howling mob behind your suggestions. No?
I'm also not seeing your guys' video anymore. I turn mine off and on to get my camera to refocus. I'm not sure if I've lost you guys.
We can see
video-wise.
We can see
you.
Okay.
Not sure why that is then.
Arcade sounds is a really good question. I don't like them. I certainly don't want them all by default. And people keep suggesting it. I don't know.
Yeah.
Where are you on this, Dan? Richard?
Go for it, Richard.
I'm a web pages that make sounds should be burned and then burned again and then burned a third time and then drowned. So I really don't like the idea, but that's maybe a personal overreaction. I can see it. So Dan just recently introduced a notification, like a simple tab level notification, something's gone on, which I think is great because if you're playing something like, a game I love, like Word Blocks, where it's reasonably async and you come and go between it, and if you're at your computer, you inevitably end up doing something else. That's really useful. And I can see sounds being helpful there in terms of just that extra alert, because you don't always notice, especially on multiple monitors, that tabs flashing at you. But having said that, I'm not even sure like how cross-browser that would be. Like if noises in other tabs will actually alert you anyway, possibly not. So it's an interesting one. I think it's something that enough people seem to want that it's worth looking at, but maybe putting in a very obvious way of getting it to be quiet if that's not your thing.
I mean, I wonder if it's more a signal for my opponents being slow and it tells us we need to be speeding up gameplay, right? Like, or getting like the stun peer-to-peer data connections, the moves don't need to go through a relay server in real time.
I think having live chat in the games as well as we go along, voice chat is also an alternative to that, where people likely won't be going off into other tabs to look at things, etc., if they're more engaged because they're actually chatting to their friends playing. So it's a variety of things. Having said web pages that make noises should die, I've just said that I'd love them to talk to me. So take what I say with a grain of salt.
Where are you on sound, Stan?
I think to a certain degree, it's kind of a request for having more sort of tactile feedback, like when you're interacting with the game, instead of being like a very like web 1.0, like click on a link, something happens. You want more interactive, dynamic, so that way, like like we're slowly integrating like some of the stuff, like little animations, to kind of like make the games more like an actual game, and less like a middle school project. So I think sounds could play like an important part of that. I mean, like even like Palm and like the original games, like you or your little space invaders, like you need a little tuk, 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 to tell you that something's happening. But yes, like definitely want to give, if we do it, we'll need to give users the option to like mute immediately, because if you're listening to your own music or something, you don't want that annoying you.
We have a question about single-player AI games. Do you have any thoughts on technical possibilities, things you've thought about?
Single player AI, so just the AI plays its own game?
The question was about I'm wondering when you can have Red Imperium with actualized versions of Duke to be tried.
It's something we've talked about. It's not currently like on the top of our priority list, but it would be very interesting to look into, like, especially for games where you need like 4 players to play. If we can, you can put in a bot to take over the role of 1 or 2 of the players, would definitely make it easier to get the games going. Oh, I don't know. Eventually, we're gonna have to split our own like subsidiary AI company when we create the let's say start passing Turing test.
Long term, there is a business model here, right? Like if you can build a machine or an AI engine that can play a game, a multiplayer game, you can collect payments playing it with other people. Because you can say like, look, I'll respond to the transactions. It's going to cost me to make a move.
You're giving away our secret business model of creating the perfect poker bot.
Yeah, poker bots, that sort of thing. Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't like. We could play around with neural networks at some point in time. I think that's more long term, though. Like right now, the focus really is we want to just improve quality, improve usability, see what people hate, and get more transactions on it. So,
I think, funnily enough, one of the hardest things to do with a chess bot would be working out how it fits into the invite system, because the invites go through the UI and people respond right now. But actually, like, one thing I've been saying recently around to the development team and sort of floating as an idea of the way we describe how Saito works as a network is to not describe node side code as a server, but to describe it as a bot. Because I think people often miss the fact that everything on Saito, like when you're playing the games, it's genuinely P2P. The messaging is going across the chain between the 2 players. There's no server holding the board state or managing stuff. And so that's where we really are Web3, and a lot of projects really aren't. So that bot mentality actually fits right in. So the kind of Saito way is if you're using something where something is stored by someone else on the network, they're operating as a bot. That might be something that stores your email or your photos for you, but it's a P2P interaction between you and that bot. So the network's really well set up for that to happen in really interesting ways. Like you could have people release in a competitive way different characters of bot or different player styles to play against, and that could be done without needing to be centralized. You wouldn't have to load it onto the thing. Those guys could just listen on the network and accept a challenge. So you could say, I want to play the Kasparov bot, and you just send a message saying, I'd like to play a chess game with it, and it would respond saying, you're on. What color do you want to be?
You can also train the bot by observing the games people are playing on the network. You can get access.
Right. They could actually, given that people are playing unencrypted chess. Themes. You could actually also analyze what's winning chess games on the arcade and go off that. So I think it's these are the things where Web3 gets interesting, and you've got this different set of modalities for creating software. And it's one of the reasons, only one, but one of the reasons we do this work on the arcade is actually fleshing this stuff out in real use cases. That's kind of cool. An interesting question.
Yeah.
Do we have more games questions? Did you have any more, David?
No, I was just going to maybe point out, if people aren't asking, that, one of the interesting things that's happening with growth and expanded usage is we're getting interesting problems. Like we've had things like we've had Chinese trolls, and we've had battles over Taiwan taking place in our chat box. It's not visible to a lot of people because sometimes those are Chinese hours when it happens. But
it happens in Chinese too, so
it
may be lost on people who aren't reading it.
Dan gets it. We get it. You guys, it looks the chat. Everyone looks happy on the chat box. Not everyone's happy. But it does flag some things. So some of the work, it's not just the games. It's things like thinking through, okay, how should we be changing the invite system to make it more robust against this sort of thing? Because there are times where we have people trolling who will come and they'll like accept the game and then tank it. And it's kind of asymmetrically destructive if, with a Web 2 server, you'd wrap that around, you pick the troll. You can't really do that Web 3. So there's thoughts into how to do these sort of things as well. And Dan's part of that. And why don't we move on to the non-arcade questions? You want to stick around?
Well, there's actually one more directly for Dan. Maybe he can hit up, which is more details on the deck-based game. Someone wants to know what you're up to there, Dan.
Another one.
Oh, okay.
What's Dan's favorite style of game? I see.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so it's. I don't know if it can just be direct.
What is it like?
Yeah, we're basically creating a version of Dominion, if you know the game. So it's like one of those games where like you start with a few cards in your hand, and you deal cards out, and you can buy resources, and it's all cards that get put into your deck and shuffled and played. Yeah, it's actually quite fun. I've played it for not many years, but I mean I've played it in different households. It's actually been a great experience trying to develop just thinking about new problems dealing with decks, because like a lot of our game engine, it's based on like solving problems for Twilight Struggle or Red Imperium.
Yeah.
And so like where they you do shuffle the deck like 3 times throughout the game or 4 times throughout the game, but this is like every player every turn is basically shuffling their deck and drawing, and that's quite interesting. Yeah.
One more I saw, Dan, was basically what's your favorite style of game?
From Kekya?
Is that Kekya? Yeah, it is Kekya. There you go, Kekya.
Yeah, what is my favorite style of game? Old NES games? I don't know.
One's where he's beating me.
I do like retro video games. For board games, definitely like. Yeah, I don't know. Like just I really enjoy cooperative games, because like I get a little bit too competitive, so it's nice to take that element out of the game, which is why I'm excited.
Dan loves Monopoly, I can tell.
Never played Dave in Monopoly. Like
loved it.
That is
like what fun this was.
Don't trust him.
That's a Red Imperium lesson, anyway.
Why don't?
Should we delve it?
Why don't we move on, Dan? If you want to stick around, that's cool. If you want to kind of go and drink heavily, and that's fine too. Richard, you want to take this one, or Dan?
The top one. I'll take the Maya one, because there's a simple answer. Yes, we've talked to the team, and we're trying to work out how to make it work for both sides. We'd like to do something more than a simple listing and hooray. So, yep, we're in discussions, and that'll happen when we can get our heads together and get some time to work out a good plan on how to do that cooperatively with the Elrond community. We've loved the interactions we've had with the Elrond guys to date, and the exchange is really solid and well run. So it's just a matter of like, how do we set ourselves out from the pack when we do it? When milk? I think we've answered that one.
Milk has happened. It may happen again.
Yeah, milk is almost out for me. I had to put ice in there because the children drank all the rest of the milk.
I think there was more than milk in there, Richard.
There was slightly more than milk, and there was ice and something else, but not enough to make it a like albino Caribbean or something, or whatever it would be called. The Chinese government question, people love to ask things like this. I think the simple answer is they've explored it, and their answer has been no. Crypto kicked off in China because of like lots of people in tech in China being able to take risks and wanting to see what could happen, etc. And the regulators spend a long time leaving that alone, actually, surprisingly, compared to what people think. And I think they've said, no, it doesn't fit in with what they want to do. So that makes me sad, because so much of the early Bitcoin action and so much of my early intro to crypto was in China, and was with some really amazing people doing kind of crazy things for the time. But I think people like to ask these questions in a pointed way, and I don't think it is. I think Chinese authorities are somewhere midway in the world in terms of how they've regulated crypto. And as much happens because of their data privacy rules, like they're equivalent of the GDPR as anything else. So, a lot of things that wouldn't be allowed because you couldn't store data about people using the system on nodes outside China, which is a kind of GDPR kind of problem. So I don't know if that's going to give people the anti or pro-China answer they look for when they ask questions like that. I always feel like they risk being a little bit, pointed. But
I kind of think of it.
That's what I'd say about it.
I don't think the Chinese government's the one that's going to help us. I think that they'll help us when it's inevitable. And I think there's a lot of people in other places, like in California, we don't really have much, if any, support in California. Those people will help us when it's inevitable. The question, it becomes inevitable when they're forced to actually understand us, because what the hell is this network doing 2 million transactions a day? Like, why have my kids started playing this game that Dan has put together, or that someone else did? I think like some of our strongest support in terms of like hardcore blockchain people are Chinese related. We've got friends, we've got resources. They're not with the state. I'm incredibly impressed with Xiao Lai. I don't think he gets enough credit outside the country. That guy's like, he's a genius. And so I kind of periodically, I wonder to myself, are we taking advantage of China? And is there something more that we should be doing in China? And I think right now the answer is probably no, because the growth and the excitement's happening outside China, and then in maybe twilight struggle communities inside China. So it's like, it's a niche application where we're seeing growth. Like it's not visible to you guys. One of our growth markets is high school kids who like playing a Chinese version of one of the board games. And again, it's kind of weird in the crypto space doing that, because people are like, oh, well, who's going to adopt your blockchain? It's like, well, high school kids in Hangzhou are going to adopt our blockchain. And our question is, how many of them can we get? But again, and like that's a marketing question, and we're working on that. But for me, the question's broader than the Chinese government. It's what else can and should we be doing in China? And I think in the last 2 years, it's been really, really difficult to do anything. And you've kind of been on the brunt of that, Richard.
I've seen a lot of it's a lot of change, and people have to react, to regulation, etc. I think one of the big things is actually what people see is there's a lot going on in China. China's a huge, vibrant place with a lot of people trying to push the boundaries. So when new regulation comes in, there's a lot of people who are doing something that might be on the edge or the wrong side of that. And that's it. To me, it's more like, the fact that, like, I don't know, Germany was full of new car makers once upon a time. And when they started to regulate cars, there were, a hell of a lot of German businesses that needed to deal with it. And it wasn't particularly to do with the German state, just that's where the car people were. So I think that is a lot of what's happened. Having said that, if China does nothing else for blockchain, it gave you Saito, because the ideas that formed that, and the exposure to blockchain that made it possible to even think about Saito came from bumping into people in the early days, and that was here. So
I think it will be. I think our connections in China will be important, but I think it will be after it's already a fait accompli. So, like honestly, like by the time we get up to 5 million transactions, the problem right now we're having with Reach Out is it's like proof of stake nonsense. People don't want to do the work of thinking, and so they're like, oh, well, unless you've got something that is already shifting and transforming the industry in a visible way, they don't want to pay attention. Or they pay attention in a narrow speculative sense, which isn't bad. But, like we're not having California VCs going, oh my God, there's a solution to 51% attack. Let's go and buy the tokens from all of the Saitozens. So, but, you know, like
Cool.
I think it's going to happen, but you know, I don't think it's going to happen in the next 4 months.
Well, I think, yeah, to just round that off, I think another way to look at that is I was talking to someone, one of the devs today, and sort of kind of explaining a bit of the architecture and the way consensus works, and saying, like, Saito never tells you can't do anything. It just makes it terribly expensive or horrifically pointless to do things that don't help the network.
Yeah.
And it'll be that way the other way around as well. The time that it starts getting used is when it's just obviously losing people money and not in their interest to exclude it. And that's going to be when that starts to make a difference. Should we
would Monopoly
move on
be hard
to
to implement? Dan has disappeared. Oh no, Dan answered that. Great. One of the challenges with something like Monopoly is there's also a balance with IP and stuff where there's a number of games where there are open source versions, and there are games where people are somewhat litigious, where we need to be more careful. So, you know, sometimes it's a bit of a gray zone. We try to stay on the right side of it. So I think with Monopoly, like, we could put out a clone, but if it's not really a fun game, why should we put the effort into putting out a clone, you know?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And some people ask about that, about the legitimacy or whatever, of like they kind of wonder. And it's a simple thing that games are not, the way games work can't be copyrighted, etc. But the way they're presented can be. And so that's a good answer there. If the game is mostly interesting because of the gameplay and you could paint it green and brown and it would still be fun to play, then it's probably a game that's worth digging into. If the game is about how it looks and the exact, you know, the names of things in the game, and I think that's one thing with Monopoly that people don't think about, is like, which Monopoly would we invent? Because to me, the Monopoly, if anything, is nostalgic, and so I would need the British one, because randomly that's what we had in South Africa and slept to Australia when I was a kid. It may not make any sense to a North American who's used to quite a different Monopoly set. So, like, I think that's the issue there with Monopoly is what makes Monopoly isn't just the fact that the mechanics of the gameplay, and presented differently, it might not be so exciting. Whereas there are other games where it's all about the mechanics, and you can dress it up several different ways, and it's going to be interesting to play. David's laughing at something I've not read.
He's just bitter at this. He didn't do well. He ended up with not many properties, and he took it out on me. I mean, I'm just a successful merchant. So, yeah, stuff like this. Again, this is great for engagement with Dan, where it's things like, these are like, it's not a technical problem. A lot of this stuff is like, is Monopoly a good game for us to put on the arcade? We know that 2-player games are better than 3-player games and 4-player games. We don't know how things like tournaments and leagues will affect that. Card games are pretty easy to push out, but 2-player card games are reasonably simple and not that interesting. So there's this sweet spot where it's strategically rich and strategically complicated, and we can make it look good and people will have fun playing it. I think Dan really, really nailed our island settling game, which, kind of to go back to Richard, like, the mechanics on that, anyone can implement. We couldn't steal someone else's artwork. But yeah.
Well, and I think that's another thing where we're also exploring those P2P aspects and the gameplay aspects. So, like, 2-player island settling is a kind of funny thing, but you can play it in 6 to 7 minutes. So you can kind of get a very different experience and dopamine hit out of a game of that than you would out of the 4-player version with a few drinks around a card table with your friends. So it's trying to work those things out, and then also kind of see how those interactions work on chain and what makes it exciting and engaging. So
we can put time and money into artwork and that kind of thing if we think it makes sense. I'm biased towards, like, trying to make sure it's fun. Like the Community Forge, the Community Magic thing, nothing has really happened with that in the last while. We haven't made any progress. Other stuff is happening. We'll come back to it at some point. But we don't we're not going to go and spend a ton of money building assets for a game unless we know we can build it in the browser and it's fun. Koba asked a question about playing poker for TRX. The game got stuck. We'll take a look at it. I know that people have been fixing some of those things. It may just be that with some of the improvements, something like a bug got introduced. As soon as we're aware of these issues, we try to fix them.
I also know that we were trying to expand coverage, and it may be that something that's gone into making the TRX or just crypto available more broadly across different games had some negative effect on poker, and we'll need to test it out and fix it.
Sometimes the game engine stuff is complicated, and just to kind of praise Dan's ability to deal with it, there are issues where when people are developing, they're thinking, oh, I'm playing Twilight Struggle. Oh, I'm playing poker. And it's like, no, you're actually playing every single Saito application that's installed in your wallet. And the moves are coming in regardless of whether you're there. So it's easy to make tiny changes where like a player navigates out of the game and they go back to the arcade to check something. And that's an edge case that then one of the players does it and it causes the game to enter a hung state. So we had a bug like that was reintroduced, and we fixed it and we cleaned up the code so that it won't happen again. But this kind of thing could easily happen. The lesson is if you run into that, I'd flag it for one of us, because if something like that is resurfacing, it's really great for us to know right away. Dan, did you want to?
Yeah, I can tag in on this. I with expanding crypto support for other games, I've definitely broken some parts of poker, but the fix is coming. We just need to push some things into production. But the specific issue he's saying is it's actually an issue we flagged when we first introduced the crypto support for poker, but it's very difficult to replicate. So we haven't been able to track down the source of the bug, where it would just hang on the microtransaction between rounds. So yeah, if you find bugs like this, please do report them, get screenshots, open up the console, let us know so we can have all the details to help us track down the actual source of it. Because we do want to fix them and make the game better.
It's also Dan's fault if it breaks.
Yes, it's always my fault, yes.
Never the fault of any underlying code or management of any kind.
Richard, I'll take the Twitter update. I think that's important. Do you want to take the news about Saito? Whichever order. News about Saito. I think the Saito announcements, Telegram channel, and Twitter are very good for getting most of the stuff. Heading over to the blog itself, saito.tech/blog, will also have any significant updates, etc., that are going on there. Those really are the best places to get information, as well as just the main Telegram group. There's always stuff going on there. For the Twitter one, here's a question. Can I put images into the chat?
Interesting question.
No. Okay, so how do I share? I'm just going to post some images in Saito Twitter. One sec. Everyone's in Saito official Telegram, right?
I presume they'll be able to see it, yeah.
Here are some images related to our town hall. Let me show you guys kind of where we are. And if anyone has any specific questions, you can see Richard's lovely face. The CSS work, we've been working on it, and it took us a lot longer than we were expecting. Some of that was communication on our side with, we have a new dev who we tasked with it. There were some communication issues. Some of it was also trying to get it organized. So it's
trying to get the scope. It can be a little bit hard when you're trying to work out, how deep does the reworking go? And so there was a little bit of just exploration around that, which I think
where do pieces start? Where do components start? Where do they end? So it took us a bit of time. If you take a look in Saito Telegram, you'll see some images. That's the current state. You can always download the repository and check it out. We love feedback and help on this stuff too. What you'll see that the CSS is kind of coming along, and you'll also see that it's not perfect. but I think you'll get a sense for instance, like the chat box, the text of the chat is just way too small in the current one. So we're fixing that. Stuff like font sizes, identicon sizes, they're just kind of random. So we're fixing that and we're standardizing it. What we don't know is we're approaching Twitter as an experimental canvas for how can we create another application that is feature rich, but that also does what the arcade does well, which is not having like siloed functionality, but brings everything together. So we're thinking, okay, well, we've got a tweet page and you can do posts and hopefully it'll be way better than the forum in the arcade. But we should also have invites so you can schedule a Zoom call or you can schedule a game for the evening or something. So where we are with it is we're using it simultaneously to test and improve the CSS. You can see there's a bunch of unstyled components, and we're going through a process of saying, look, we need this to be styled properly. We need a consistent style. We're exploring like what features should be there. And it's also like the creative thought process where like if we have leaderboards, well, we're going to display them here, I suppose. We also need to put them in the arcade. What should they look like and what should that process go through? So it's not fast, but the reason it's not fast is because we're approaching it as much more than a Twitter clone. What I think has worked with the arcade is it's when the games combine with chat. And we're looking for games plus chat plus this other stuff. And the idea is just to create this really rich information hub so that, one of the problems I've noticed is our team has difficulty communicating with you guys in the community. And partly that's because the Saito forum is terrible. So I'm hoping that we get Red Square up and we can get, like, if we can fix our communication issues, we can fix community communication issues too. Hopefully that's an update. You can see stuff is happening away.
Yeah. I think that also there's another question below which kind of links to that. So I might hop onto that now, which is just around, is there an arcade revamp in the works? And the answer to that is a quick yes. This work on the CSS, etc., and then getting that working in what we're calling Red Square. That's all being done to make it much more, much simpler and quicker for developers to like drop in pre-built components and reassemble them into something really useful. And that's going to flow into arcade as soon as it's worthy. Arcade is obviously our flagship space at the moment, and we're hoping to get people around more of the app, of the suite, not just the arcade. But we don't want to go dropping things into the arcade and making it a less engaging experience, by starting there. So yes, but it's sort of going to be a little while once we've got Red Square really moving.
It's a big thing. It's not a super hard thing. It's kind of tricky because we're also trying to simplify how modules work. Like if you've tried to do any Saito development, it's really ad hoc. There's like modules define initialize HTML and modules define attach events and stuff. And it's not intuitive. We have some components like the header, and the header is like you initialize it in a totally different way. And
I think the history there is really important, which is that when like the original email application was built to demonstrate that the Saito network would be useful, and VCs and people we were introducing the ideas to weren't grokking that you could have a blockchain as a network. And so we just wanted to put messages on it to show that happening. And it wasn't intended that one day would be part of a thoroughgoing application suite, etc. So there is some historical layering of us building things as we needed them, and as it became clear, peer-to-peer applications need this thing. We'll do that, and then we occasionally have to go through these arcs, like at the moment, where we clear out a bit of cruft and make the runway a bit smoother. Particularly as people are interested in participating, and we need to get it to a point where it's a great experience, not fighting against bits of historical baggage here and there and stuff like that.
So new design, you can see I put a little bit of code in Saito Telegram, and you can see it's things like we've got components and you can just add them. And so if you add the header, there it is in your app. and all of the modules and all of the components, there's a render function. Call this render function, and if they're on the page, they're going to render an update. There's a lot of really weird stuff that happens. Like you could technically send a transaction to your header if you wanted to. So like it's interesting.
Yeah.
Like maybe you could have the Times Square advertising billboard running on Saito, and you could send a transaction to it and get it to do something at some point. There's interesting possibilities, not really practical immediately, but this is part of what's happening as well. So it's not that we're being slow writing a Twitter clone. It's that we're doing a lot of stuff, and we're trying to do a lot more than Twitter. And we're hoping, we view it as a community project. We've kind of come in and kind of said, oh, community, not go away, but give us a bit of time. Our hope is that when we get everything kind of set up, we'll be able to say, this is what we think the next stage of development looks like. And it will be easier for people who want to contribute, because it will be a lot simpler and easier to see, like, oh, I'm programming components and combining.
Mm-hmm. Cool. I think we've only got sort of 8 minutes left, so maybe we'll plow through a few of these really quickly. Partnerships, I think the big vector happening there, aside from the stuff that's bubbling away with Maya, will be around generic crypto and including other cryptos into the system, and then being able to engage with other ecosystems and other communities. That's really exciting, but that's obviously we've had a couple of questions about reliability, robustness, usability, etc., and we want to iron those things out before we push too far there. But that's definitely in the roadmap and something we're working towards.
Do you want me to talk just briefly about it's a combination of second era and the token stuff?
Mm-hmm.
Richard mentioned it very briefly at the beginning. I think we're really pleased actually with how things have gone. One of the things you can do is you can actually take a look at the tokens we've distributed to people. Vesting into an emerging bear market was not particularly fun, but I think we've actually done really well in terms of where we are. The people that have sold, the people that are holding are still holding. But like Richard said, I think we're in a very good position. We've always thought of it as taking 3 to 4 months for things to work through. So, at that pace, it would be September or so where we would expect to be thinking about moving into the second era. We have, I think, two more funds or something that are delayed. They have tiny issuances delayed, so it's not a big deal. I'd expect us to move into the second era this autumn. And then, when people are thinking about staking, like it's the original roadmap, we'll be introducing it probably in the middle of the second era. So I don't know if that's the end of this year or the beginning of the next one. One thing I would flag, because people they say that, and I think a lot of the time they're asking about token price. I think we've been straightforward with our strategy. We want to have a market beating token. We don't want to be engaging in pump and dumps. We want the progress to come from people genuinely understanding the value of the Saito token and the Saito network. And, for us, the vesting stuff, watching what's happening is really important, because how we do something like staking, should we offer an EY for early stakers? That's a question that I don't think we can ask until we...
Well, and I think everyone in the community and everyone in the audience should at least now be very, very aware of things we were saying over the last year around the risks involved, like the existential risks to projects from trying to do that kind of thing and getting it wrong, either out of good motives or flawed motives. Just going around offering APRs that you plucked out of the air, it's not very Saito for the reason that it's not very Saito. It's also dangerous, and I think it's one of the advantages we have at the moment, and the advantages we have in the bear is that people are more aware and they're taking the 10 minutes to think this stuff through, whereas you could see last December people just wanted to find out where they could get the highest return on their tokens of any kind, and they weren't even really looking into what the tokens were, what they were based on, and that makes it very hard for us to come out with that messaging. And so what I think we're seeing is uptick in holder numbers and things like that, which tell me things have been shaken out and we're settling into a much better phase of growth where it's based on the community that we know is the basis of what we're doing, and the information and the kind of messaging that is core to what we're doing, and it has a chance to get out there. So I think that's one of the reasons I'm really positive.
Yeah. I mean, we can look and we can see in some cases people who've sold and we're delighted that they're out, because it's like, well, that's a whale that's divested. And it's interesting watching, because sometimes it's like the funds, and you can see that they're having a horrific time in the market. And it's like, it's great to actually get someone like that defanged, especially if they're going to sell at a low price. So,
well, and especially we set reasonably high for us. We thought moderate, apparently compared to most other projects, incredibly high standards of what we expected in terms of support and participation. And what we found out from some people, we got great support and participation from some of our backers, but some really weren't up to it. And so we're seeing, I think, a general shaking out in the industry of that. And so if people who, weren't really, they weren't in with Saito the same commitment and dedication as we see from the community, it's great if they've departed, really.
Yeah.
So
I'll say, like, for things like staking, we can always do things like say, look, we're going to have an APY for staking, and we've really got to be able to think through it, because if we're pulling tokens off of ERC and BSC and that stuff, and we're how does that affect the market? Should we be doing this stuff? I think as a project, there's a lot less pressure for us if we are market beating on things like Bitcoin and ETH. And I think people don't always think through the implications of what issuing APY and on-chain tokens might mean for how things like the ERC20 is valued as well. So, I think one of the reasons we want to see how things shake out is because depending on what happens in the market and depending on how Saito is doing in 4 to 5 months, we'll have more flexibility. Like, if we can get away without issuing APY because holding Saito is such an obvious win and people are like beginning to understand what the network actually does, it's like, that can buy us more. If that can buy us more time to get from 200,000 transactions to like 3 million, why should we be in a rush? And so I think personally, a lot of these questions are sideways. People don't really care about the functionality. What they're looking for is, do you guys care about token price? Is this strategically important? And what are the points at which someone who's a speculator can swim? And so I think if people understand what we're doing and why we're doing it, it makes sense. But that's why the roadmap is what it is. So I don't know. I'd expect Secondera sometime after September. And please don't post on Twitter. That means September 1st, because that's what
that's what David said.
Yeah,
that's what Dan's for. I see another couple of questions actually related. They might be good to kind of round off on. One is the magnitude of daily TX fees the network would require to make it possible to secure store of value apps. And then the next one is, how will fees be calculated in practice once we're live? And I think that's a thanks, DB. I think they're kind of related to, and they relate back in my head to something I said earlier, which is, Saito doesn't tell people how to run, price things. It gives them a way to price it. So you can calculate out, depending on how much value is in a store of value type app, whatever that thing's doing, the security required is, when is the app usable because there is enough fee value flowing past that you don't have to wait too long for transaction reversals to be problematic, right? So the risk on any chain is that it gets reorganized by a malicious actor who's got the resources to artificially generate a longer chain, thereby removing existing transactions that you valued. If your store of value is doing small things and they're $1 a time, your keys are secure, your total balance is fine on the address. The issue is, if you're transacting $10, you have to wait till it's unfeasibly expensive to reverse $10 worth of chain. That's reasonably quick. if you're trying to make $1 million transactions, it's going to take longer. So I think you'll just see an arc of small payments and things coming into their own first, where no one's going to be reversing microtransactions or small payments, subscriptions, etc. It'll take a while longer until once you've got $1 million a minute moving through the network, you'll be talking about almost any amount of money being able to be transacted and be secure.
I'll give an answer from a different approach. I think we need millions. And I don't buy the argument that we should be prioritizing store value apps. Like strategically, we're not. Maybe we should. But I think that prioritizing what we're prioritizing now leaves us the flexibility to go after store value in the future if this doesn't work, but not in reverse. I don't think we can make the changes we need to say, oh, look, Sato's a store of value, and then say, oh, and you should come to the arcade. But we can take a run with the arcade, and we can take a run with Red Square, and we can take a run with non-financial apps, and then move on to store value stuff. And I think it's millions. And I think one of the things we're seeing with networks like Solana is that kind of mess is the cost of putting store value first. Also with like smart contracts and the messes that those networks are running into, we don't need to fall into those traps. If we can grow transaction volume without store value, we'll get store value for free. It's if we can't that we need to worry about making the changes.
I kind of never even thought of that. I'd always assumed that store of value comes as a property of an advanced Saito network, but you don't get there without it. Yeah, I suppose you could, but I just always thought of it in that way.
I mean, we're saying data broadcast apps with SIGs for other cryptos. If we can build transaction volume around that with Red Square and Twitter and the arcade and stuff, we get a baseline in the millions with that. Store of value is going to come. We're gonna we don't want to do store of value with low security. Like
nobody does.
Okay,
cool.
Vacancy is an assignment. We're looking for help with marketing outside of China. So we do need help with that. I think we can communicate that. We're really almost at our limits in terms of the size of the team and growing and training people up. So we can't really take on a lot of additional paid help yet. Maybe it'll be another 2 months until we can.
So I mean, we had 3-4 people come on in quick succession, and that's the amount of training, etc., that's been involved in that has taken us away from being able to expand beyond that. But it's starting to have real impact on what people are seeing coming out of the team. So we're really positive.
If there's something people want to do, that's fine. Like I think
get in touch.
Sometimes we get hit up with people who want to help, and they're like, "Oh, well, you should pay me," and it's like, "Well, we'd love to pay you." Part of the challenge is we don't want to be training people and paying them, because then it's like it's a burden on our own ability to kind of train up the team. So I'd say we're at capacity for the next 2 months, and that's just. Like Red Square is a training process, both on module building and CSS and application building.
And also, I mean, that's the biggest thing that's coming out of that is we really are working on lowering the learning curve and the effort required to come and be productive and either build something of your own or contribute something useful. And what we've seen is we put out that shingle and asked people to come along and start participating, and we weren't really able to come to them on it when they did because of things thankfully that clarified, and we've been working on ironing out. Cool.
Okay.
Any other items you'd like to cover, David? I think it's probably a good idea to wrap up and maybe head over to Saito Telegram and hit people up there. So thanks, Dan. Thanks everyone for your questions to Dan, and great to catch up with you.
Yeah. Thanks for coming.
There's Dan.
Okay.
He's still milkless.
Okay. Take care, guys.
See you guys.